Okay, so it's Sunday, January 3rd. It felt good to be back in Mr. Edwards' house, filled with electric lights to chase away all the dark shadows. Even though I only worked 2 days, he handed me my full pay for the week, and last week too. I haven't earned all this, I said. Mr. Edwards closed my hand around the money and said, "Yes, you have." I saw Mama wipe away a tear when I gave it to her. Sunday, January 11th. Usually I like January. One year Papa made us skis out of old barrel stays. Stays are the long slats of wood that go up and down the sides of a barrel. We skied down our hill, struggled to climb back up, and skied down again, laughing all the way. Lots of children often slide down on pieces of cardboard. The ponds and lakes are frozen so thick we do not have to worry about falling through the ice when we take a shortcut across or want to slide and skate. There are always snowball fights in the field. Papa, Yago, and Mati talk on and on about who will win each hockey game. This year, I hate January. The nights seem endless, and the days are cold and gray. Katri begged me to join them sliding down our hill, but I said I have to study for my exams. I said the same thing when some of my old classmates asked me to come out to the pasture for a snowball fight. I sat at the upstairs window and watched them. My reading book was open, but I never turned a page. Right before I left to walk back to Mr. Edwards' house, I went to the shed to say hello to Daisy. I rubbed her nose and patted her belly. "The next time I see you, you might have your new calf," I whispered. "I'm sorry Yenny has to keep milking you this time. You probably wonder why we have not let you freshen like we always did. The truth is, there's not a whole lot for our family to eat without your milk, so thanks." And here's a picture of 5th Street in Red Jacket, Calumet, in winter. Note the snowshoes and the sleigh runners have replaced wheels on the wagon in the depths of the snow piles. Not so much unlike what we see nowadays, but you can see how the streets were filled with snow there. I thought back to last April when Mutty walked halfway to Electric Park to a farm with a good bull. Papa bought Daisy from that farm, and we have sent her back there every April since she was old enough to breed. The calf always goes back when it's able to leave Daisy. Our shed is too small for more than one cow. One year, the farmer keeps the calf as payment for the bull's service. The next year, Papa gets to keep it. The farmer has the use of ours until Papa has his farm. He has one other cow so far. I hope this year Daisy has a bull. Papa will trade it for one who is not related to Daisy. Then our farm will have a bull to keep building Papa's dairy herd. I dragged my feet on the walk back to Lorium. Wednesday, January 14th. I have stopped reading the newspapers. People say Mr. McNaughton left for a vacation, but he really went to Boston to meet with the company owners. They say people are leaving the area by the thousands. The train is full every time it heads south, and nearly empty when it comes back. They say that more people are working for C&H now than were before the strike started. They must not be very good because not as much rock is coming out of the mines. They say Mr. Moyer recovered from his injuries and is back up here. They say that a big New York newspaper said Houghton County is not a community of American citizens, but one of aliens brought here from other countries to slave for a monopoly ruled by Boston. Mrs. Edwards sent me on some errands today, and I did not even stop at the library. I happened to see Big Annie on the street. They say her husband left her while she was spending 10 days in jail for the assault charge, and that she went home to a cold, empty house. Her eyes were dull and her face long. She walked with her shoulders rounded and did not seem so tall. She did not recognize me when I said hello. Almost all the National Guardmen have left. They finally turned off the huge searchlight, McNaughton's Eye, which has shone over the mine's offices for so long. It's even darker at night. I should study for my exams, but I do not care anymore. Sunday, January 25th. Daisy has a fine, healthy bull. Everybody was happy about that since this is Papa's year to keep her offspring. This afternoon, Yenny and Katri asked Papa to let them jump out of our bedroom window into the snow. Papa said they could, and they ran off laughing to bundle up in warm clothes. "You too, Emma," he said. "Go have a bit of fun." "I'm too tired," I said. No, you're not. You slept in church. Go with your sisters now. Last year I was just as excited as they were when the snow got deep enough to jump out the window. The blast of cold air and the drop usually grab at my heart and lungs in a way that is both frightening and exciting. This year, all I felt was a soft thud. I forced myself to grin for Yenny and Katri. Wednesday, January 28th, I think. Somehow, I managed to pass my 7th grade reading and math exam. When Papa saw my C's, he put his hands on my shoulders and said in Finnish, "I'm still proud because you stayed in school. I know you will do better again when you can go back to school in the day. This semester of night school, I am taking history and science." A while back, a grand jury indicted Mr. Moyer and many other WFM members for conspiring to keep men from going to work. The men who beat up Mr. Moyer were not charged with any crime. They say Mr. Moyer tried to get workers all over Michigan to join in a sympathy strike. It probably will not happen. But the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. voted to send some people up here to investigate. I only nodded when Mr. Edwards handed me today's paper. He put his finger under my chin and lifted it, so I looked at him. "Emma, where's your smile?" he asked. I felt my lip quiver. I only shrugged my shoulders because I thought I might cry again if I tried to talk. "Maybe I should send you to see my doctor," he said. I bit the inside of my cheek to get control of myself and managed to say, "No, thank you, sir. I am not sick." Thursday, February 5th. Last night I dreamed I was at the Christmas party again and woke up screaming. Maud turned on the light and came around the curtain to my side of our room. She hugged me for a while and we talked. "I think I'm going crazy," I told her. "No, you aren't, Emma," she said. Then she told me about something that happened to her. She was 6 years old and the only child in her family. Her parents had a farm out near Gratiot Lake. Her father liked to ice fish in the winter and even had a little shed he would drag out onto the ice. It was late in the winter the day it happened. Her mother went out to the ice fishing shed to take her father a jug of hot coffee. There were little slushy puddles on top of the ice, but her father had said the ice was still strong. Well, her mother slipped and fell. When she hit the ice, there was a terrible cracking sound. The ice broke all apart, and both her parents and the shed went down into the dark water. They never came up. Maud had been standing on the shore the whole time. She saw it all. I was alone and had to run almost 2 miles to the nearest neighbor for help, she told me. Those same neighbors took me in and raised me. I had nightmares for months afterward. Some people said they should send me to an asylum. My adopted mother told them I only needed lots of love. She also told me to think about blueberry pie because it's good and sweet and happy. She hugged me again. I still think about blueberry pie whenever I'm sad. When I think of blueberry pie, I think about how much work it is to pick that many berries, I said. Then what's the happiest thing you can think of? Picking daisies on a warm day in June. I even named our cow Daisy because of that. We got her when I was 8. Mama said she would be mine to care for, so I could name her. Whenever you are afraid or sad, think about picking daisies. So I went back to sleep thinking about a field so full of daisies it looked like a white quilt with tiny yellow polka dots for the daisy centers. Saturday, February 14th. It was so odd what happened in the back room of Mr. Edwards' store today. I was back there sorting out potatoes again, then suddenly the room seemed to disappear, and I saw the open graves again. I felt like I was being dragged down into them. I gripped my chest and said, "Daisies, daisies," over and over. I must have said it pretty loud. When Mr. Edwards put his hand on my shoulders, I jumped. "Emma, are you all right?" he asked. My heart was still pounding. I could hardly catch my breath. I could not stand it anymore and burst into tears. It was a good thing there were no customers at the time. Mr. Edwards put his arms around me and rubbed my back. It felt so good. I cried on his chest for the longest time. I told him about all the dreams I have had and what Maud said and everything I was afraid to say before. "Am I crazy?" I asked him. "If you were, I don't think you would be able to tell me about all this so easily," he said. He brushed my hair back. Blueberries and daisies. Maud is a wise woman. I think you should keep following her advice. Emma, you are a very bright, strong young woman. I think God has a good plan for you. Monday, February 16th. The congressional hearings have been going on for a week now. So far, there is nothing in the papers that I have not read before. In my history class, we are reading about the men who wrote the Constitution. They had a lot of arguments, but they managed to come together about it. I wonder if they thought back then that they were making history. I wonder if we are making history here and now. I wonder if the congressman will be able to help us come together with C&H. Will anyone ever study about us? A jury found 4 of the company men involved in the murders at Seaborville guilty of manslaughter. 3 of them got the minimum sentence of 7 to 15 years in prison. The 4th was found not guilty. Our men say they got off too easy. Others say they should have all been found not guilty because they were just doing their jobs. I do not know what I think anymore. Friday, February 20th. Maud is always the one who serves dinner when Mr. and Mrs. Edwards have guests, but today she went to bed in the middle of the afternoon with chills and fever. I have often served tea to Mrs. Edwards and the ladies, but I began to panic, mostly because tonight's guests were Mr. and Mrs. Richards, James, and his younger sister. Mrs. Edwards came out to the kitchen to help put the finishing touches on the dinner before they arrived. She must have seen my hand shaking. I'm very confident in you, Emma, she said. These are our close friends, so it isn't so formal. Don't you let young James rattle you. I'm going to serve family style, so you will only have to put the serving dishes on the table. Stand by the sideboard in case we need anything. Serve the coffee and dessert just as you do tea. Daisies, 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 I said to myself as I went to open the front door. Mr. Richards handed me his coat and hat without even looking at me. James glared, and I ignored him. Mrs. Richards smiled and thanked me for helping her with her cape. Miss Rose said, "Hello, Emma," as she took off her coat. I had met her once on the playground at school. I hung their wraps in the front closet while they went to the parlor. I put everything on the table and announced dinner. Mr. and Mrs. Edwards sat at the ends of the table, with Mr. Richards and James on one side, Mrs. Richards and Rose on the other. James was closer to Mrs. Edwards. Everything went fine through the meal, but every time I needed to go around to James's side of the table, he would put his foot out, so I had to go around it. Mr. Richards kept looking at me with his brow wrinkled. Many people say I look like my father, so I tried not to look right at him. The strike came up close to the end of the meal. Mr. Richards was complaining about some of the replacement workers. They just don't work as hard as those Finns. He stopped and looked right at me. Mrs. Edwards spoke quickly. "And wasn't it nice to see the sun out so brightly yesterday? I'm beginning to long for spring break-up." Then Mr. Edwards brought up the latest hockey game. I wish some magic from the stories of my childhood could make me invisible, but all I could do was stand quietly by the sideboard. "Emma, I think we're ready for coffee and dessert," Mrs. Edwards finally said. As I turned, I heard Mr. Richards say, "Her father is one of those strikers, isn't he?" Their voices carried into the kitchen. "Yeah, he is," I heard James say. "James, mind your manners." That was Mrs. Richards. "Chester, why in the world have you got one of them working for you?" I began to feel very hot, and it wasn't from the stove or the pot of coffee. I walked out of the kitchen carrying 3 plates of chocolate cake and gritting my teeth. There was an awkward silence. I managed to give the ladies their dessert. Then I heard a buzz of whispers and shh, shh, as I came in with the other 3 plates. James had his foot out farther this time. I set his cake in front of him with shaking hands. Mr. Edwards was tapping his fingers on the table. I left again to get the coffee pot. Anger boiled inside me. Our pastor's words from last Sunday came back to me. Jesus told them, if the soldiers force you to take a burden 1 mile, carry it 2. I thought about daisies again and picked up the pot and went back to the dining room. I poured Mrs. Richards' coffee first and then Mrs. Edwards. James's foot was way out, right where I would have to step. Oh, how I wanted to touch it with mine and then pour that scalding coffee right in his snooty lap. Instead, I stopped still and said, Excuse me, Mr. Richards, using his last name like I would for his